So we're here to start with our first panel today is going to look at the evolution of the West Side. There's been an incredible amount of development, both on the commercial and residential side. The neighborhood isn't what it used to be. A lot of new players have come into the market. With those changes have obviously come challenges in terms of affordability, housing supply, mass transit. So we're going to tackle all that and more. And we've got a pretty cool cast of characters here to help us with that. So they span, all the way from residential to politics to commercial. It should be a good time. So I'll start right to my immediate left is Casey Keys. Casey is a senior vice president at Seritage Growth Properties, where she oversees development on the west side, and she's spearheading the adaptive reuse project of the iconic Sears building in Santa Monica. Casey used to shop at that building as a kid, so it's a nice come around for her. Thank you and welcome. To her left is Tom Wolf. Tom oversees commercial development in Southern California for Low Enterprises, and he is spearheading a project called the Ivy Station Complex in Culver City. It's a $300 million project, mixed use, tremendous potential, and really a case study for what can happen on the west side. To his left is Tammy Pardee. Tammy is our residential expert in the house today. So she is the founder and CEO of Halton Pardee and Partners, a brokerage that has sold over $3 billion worth of properties. I know that number keeps changing. I checked last week, we were accurate, but it could be somewhere else now. So Tammy, welcome. So Tammy's going to talk a little bit about how the West Side has changed from a residential perspective. To her left is Stephen Fifield. He is the founder and CEO of Fifield Companies, which has developed over 8,000 residential units across the country. Current projects in LA with Century West Partners include the development of about 2,000 units across LA, Koreatown, Santa Monica. Welcome, Stephen. And to his left is the mayor of Culver City, in more ways than one, Jeffrey Cooper. Jeff is serving his second term as the mayor of Culver City. He previously served a decade on the Parks and Rec Committee. And Jeff is in an enviable and unenviable position of working out how to deal with Culver City's rapid transformation, evolution, and expansion. So maybe, Jeff, we should start with you, since you're our political expert here.
Is that what I am? Sure.
What have we seen in Culver City in the last 5 years that has been most surprising? There's been a lot of talk about tech tenants coming in, transforming the neighborhood. But from your perspective, what's been the most challenging, surprising issue?
For sure, the most challenging thing is not only the growth, but just the traffic implications. For us as electeds, people don't email us or call us or text us about how wonderful things are. They contact us about complaints. So that's kind of my little barometer, is the complaint barometer. And people, are always, because of all the pass-through traffic, and that could be attributed to a number of things. But the past 5 years have really been amazing. I mean, as an elected, my, goals were pretty simple, Fiscal responsibility, make sure the city was strong, make sure our streets are clean and there's not a lot of potholes, make sure our parks are nice, make sure the police, fire, emergency services are there for our residents. And that was really my simple goals. And with that, I mean, I think it's location, where we're located. And the Expo train coming into our town really jettisoned us forward. That and watching the development of creative content and how much that's evolved, and the demand for that has really changed the face of Culver City in a good, positive way.
But on the challenges side, you're getting a new crop of residents who are coming in, a lot more wealthy with different priorities. How have you taken stock of that, and how has the city, I guess, evolved to deal with that?
I mean, obviously we've had a lot of residents that have lived there. It was strictly, Culver City was a blue-collar city. And actually, it's kind of funny. I live in an area called Studio Estates, which is just west of Sony, and used to be old MGM lot. And my neighbor, who was an original neighbor, has saved all the clippings from the 70s when they opened up this development of Studio Estates. Nary a mention of Culver City. It was the Westside's newest development, and it just because the Culver City didn't have that cachet back then. But it's challenging because with all that growth, a lot of folks that have lived there for a long time are kind of having to deal with that growth and the change and their desire to have things as they were. And so much of our city has residential and commercial abutting each other, so those changes are in people's faces. We've tightened up some of our zoning on our residential because we've had, gee, you're building these McMansions, but we try to understand that, hey, the needs of people that are moving in and living now are very, very different than they were 30, 40 years ago when you had these original 3-bedroom, 1-bath, 1-story homes. So it's a challenge, but we kind of have to remain strong and understand we're really looking at the future for our city.
Stephen, off camera, we were talking a little bit about the issue of affordability. When an area changes the way it has so rapidly, and the city may not be equipped to deal with that change right away, that brings up issues of people who need to have a house can't afford to live there. Any thoughts on where that's headed on the west side?
LA is not generally considered a pro-development area except in a couple areas. So downtown LA, Koreatown, Hollywood, some of the suburbs like Glendale, Pasadena have embraced development more, and so most of the action is happening there. Our prior councilman on the west side, Rosendahl, was not in favor of new development. And of course, NIMBYs are very active. I don't know if you realize that the term NIMBY actually started in Westwood. Most people think it started in Florida. But the first NIMBY groups were founded here in LA, and they really prevent a lot of development. And of course, zoning codes, when you've got areas that are largely single family, like R2, R3 zone properties, even on Wilshire Boulevard or Venice Boulevard or whatever, you can't get the density in. Excuse me. And the city has not done a new master plan, I think, nor has probably Culver City, nor has Santa Monica for decades. And so they are not dealing with how things have evolved. Good urban planners will say, put your density on the major corridors, put it near public transportation, and if you have more demand, do that. But none of these cities have done this. So that, if there are 14 or 15 major submarkets in Los Angeles, only 4 of them maybe 5 we can actively develop. And the demand for housing is never being met here in Los Angeles. We are always short of housing. And the worst problem we have as it relates to affordable is that there's somewhat of, I believe, a misguided impression that we have an affordable problem. We actually have more of a workforce housing problem in Los Angeles, as does several other major cities have had a lot of growth. Now, what I mean by that is this. Has anybody here been involved with affordable housing? Just raise your hands. So you know that 60% AMI limits mean that basically if you are required in a certain municipality, like say Santa Monica, where we build, our new projects now we have to do 20% affordable housing. Somebody said, how can you even make those deals work? And the answer is, we're getting over $6 a square foot rents. LA, the rest of LA is getting like 3.5. People will pay up to be in Santa Monica. So people point to Santa Monica and say, well, they get 20% affordable. But we have to pass that on to the rest of our tenants. Right. To make we can't get the banks to give us money if it doesn't work. So what happens is that people think, oh, well, I've got to solve the affordable problem. The affordable problem basically says that if you're limited to 60% AMI, but you're a landlord who wants to get at least enough rent to pay your expenses and taxes, not even your mortgage, just your expenses and taxes, you'll take a person with income of no less than, say, $20,000 or $22,000 a year. So we're all running around, all of us who have affordable housing requirements, running around looking for tenants that make between $20,000 and $30,000 a year. Most of our demand is for tenants who make between $30,000 and $65,000. Most of those tenants cannot afford to come into market rate housing in Los Angeles. It's even harder, for example, in Culver City, where developers tend to build larger units because of the way their zoning is written. So most people build 2 and 3 bedroom units there, and unless you're getting roommates, you have a challenge there. So we're not meeting the requirements for workforce housing, which is the bigger question. Unfortunately, there aren't too many political groups that want to talk about workforce housing. The only ones I know in Los Angeles are out by Warner Center, where they will put in, and they've been doing this for 20 years, requirements where you have a certain percentage of 80% AMI or 100%.
I guess
AMI.
politically it's easier to campaign for the have-nots than the have-littles or have-somes, right? I think that might be part of it as well, Jeff.
Yeah, but if you're worried about attracting Amazons and Silicon Beach, I mean, what's happening in the West Side here is that tech and entertainment have intersected. And that's why this area has such huge job growth. It isn't just financial institutions expanding their employment and the like, but, the Amazons and the Netflixes and people like that, they're all in this area who all need housing. So what the heck are their youngest workers coming out of college, some of whom come in as non-paid interns with mom and dad footing the bill, what are they doing for housing? Well, they're having to live 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half away because our cost structure here as developers puts us in a position where we've got to get much higher rents.
And that puts an even greater strain on transit, and then the cycle exacerbates that way. Tom, is there any sort of bigger solution to this? Is overhauling the zoning code, is that in the cards? Where can we go from where we are if we want to avoid becoming the next San Francisco?
I think, as I look at it, and we're building some housing in Culver City. We're building 200 units of market rate apartments. But that's a drop in the bucket. And I think, as I say that, what's really changed is two things. One, it's the zoning, I think, in terms of what you can get approved through the process and what's there. But two, and maybe even more so, and I think it's compounded the impact that we're seeing and we're facing from the public on the development side, is the lack of affordable housing funds and revenue. I mean, when the governor shut down redevelopment, he didn't only take away the ability for us to work with cities to put large sites together like we did at Ivy Station, but they also took away affordable housing. They took away the funding for affordable housing. So that I think has exacerbated the problem overall, and I think it's become more so at the forefront of attention for folks. But that's not something that's going to be solved right away. I think what can be solved is really trying to understand and look at how and where we do density, like Steve said. The City of LA started to do that with the transit neighborhood plans along the Expo Line corridor. They're looking at doing some upzoning in order to permit additional density of housing. And I think Culver City is looking at that now, I know as well, in their downtown, trying to figure out how to get more units in. The bigger picture in my mind is it's not so much we're not building enough affordable housing or workforce housing. We're not building enough housing overall. I mean, I think the real issue is we need to be building 100 to 200,000 units a year in the LA County area, and we're building, 10 to 20,000 units a year. I mean, that's why I say even our 200 unit development is a drop in the bucket. Those things don't make a difference. We need a global change, and it's not something that can easily be solved by one municipality or one developer. It's an overall aspect that we all need to address.
Well, there's another key factor to this too, which is like the JJJ ordinance that was passed in fall of 2017, well-intended, but it was also financed, the whole effort was financed by the trade unions. So they put besides the affordable housing requirements, they now require upzone properties to have all union labor. Now, all of us in this room who build housing that is not high-rise housing tend to go 60 or 70% non-union labor. So what's happened in Los Angeles proper is the JJJ on all sites that it covers, which is all upzone, increased density sites, are now infeasible. So I don't know who's keeping track of it, but there's no housing being built on those sites. So that's actually cutting down the supply because we're paying almost double for union labor, which drives our costs up enough that we'd have to see like 25% rent increases just to cover for the increased cost.
Well, I was just going to say, they also just passed the linkage fee in LA, and you asked about, are they redoing plans? The City of Santa Monica just passed its downtown community plan that now requires 30% affordable. And so the challenge is that some of the policies that are intended to create more housing are actually deterring development altogether. And so figuring out how to solve that problem, I mean, I've had a couple of conversations with, developers who do smaller housing projects who are just saying they're just not going to do work in LA after the linkage fee. They're just not. So when you tack on $15 a foot to a project, even though that's intended to kind of backfill redevelopment funds, if you don't get the project built, you're getting nothing. So it's trying to figure out how to solve for spurring more development and make it easier rather than harder, I think.
It's interesting how these problems seem to hop across several markets. In New York, we're dealing with the same issues, in Florida as well, South Florida at least. I wanted to take the temperature of the room a little bit so we can get a sense of where we need to go. How many residential brokers in the audience? Okay, some. How many developers? Wannabe developers? Okay, perfect. And then just assorted commercial brokers? Okay, brilliant. So, Tammy, let's go to you. In terms of the buyer pool on the West Side, it has changed quite a bit in the last 5 years. You're seeing people who are priced out of certain neighborhoods, but you're also seeing people consider the West Side more of a destination now. This isn't my fallback anymore. This is somewhere I want to be, not only because of work, but because of the options around. Talk a little bit about the buyer pool, how it's changed, and how you as a broker cater to that.
Well, one of the things when you were saying up to $70,000 for the average person, I'm really seeing it, or we're seeing it, up to $120,000. It's really not affordable, really, on the West Side to live, and that's truly sad. We're seeing a lot of people share housing, a lot of people actually sharing rooms. I mean, where we are, we have offices all over, but our Venice office, literally, like, we see people that are homeless, living in their car, going to work, that are making $50,000 a year. Like, that's an issue. Like, that's a major, major issue. And from what I'm hearing here, we can't really address it because there's so much red tape around it. So I think that's the part to me that really, like, I have those people that, that aren't doing that, but that, people being 50, 60, and they have to live either far away, and it's not right. And there's the housing. What we're seeing with, like, the Snapchatters and the Google and all of those people, I think everyone thinks they're, like, so rich, and they're not. Like, they started, what you were saying too, they started somewhere too, right? So, I mean, there are some that are rich, yes, but the people that aren't, they have to kind of scrap it. And I think there's got to be something. I personally think on the corridors, smaller units, honestly, the people that I'm seeing, they don't want to drive a car, period. If we could, I mean, I know the birds are a new thing for everybody, but I think they're brilliant because honestly, in Venice, everybody is riding a bird. Like, no one's even driving anymore. It's like, oh my God, no, the birds. And so, there's got to be changes made in a government level, and you're fabulous, by the way. I just got our CFO for our new office in Mar Vista, so thank you. But there's got to be some changes made truly on a public level of getting these things through. I think that I used to work in affordable housing when there used to be the redevelopment agencies in the 90s. I thought that was brilliant because we were going and redeveloping Southgate, which Southgate was disgusting where we were redeveloping, and they allowed us to do it. There are some low-income developments going to Venice, very controversial, again, NIMBYs. We need it. I mean, we do, but we need the low income, very low, the moderate. And then we need to have a plan to get the homeless people that are actually homeless, not the people coming to party on the streets of Venice and everywhere else, the actual chronic homeless into housing.
But let's talk about the people who are of means and who can purchase. What are you seeing in terms of, are they coming, are they local, are they coming in from somewhere else? Just paint a picture of the buyer pool at this moment.
A lot of New Yorkers come to the West Side, a lot from all over. We have a lot of techies where we are. They want houses that are done. So they want completely soulful, amazing living. They want outdoor space. They all want their own bathroom. Let's be clear. They don't want the big modern boxes. Like, we're really getting a pushback on that. If it's not a soulful experience for them, they all are into the experience. So whether that be in the house, whether that be on Abbot Kinney, whether that be on whatever it is, that's how we're selling it. We're selling through experiences, not like a house.
So less doorman, more yoga room kind of thing as well, right?
I'd say surfing. I mean, yeah. Like, one of the big things. Okay, so there used to be the man cave, right? Sure. Like, you guys all love your man cave, I know.
I missed out on
and
that.
I'm going to coin this to
guys.
Katie Pardee, my cousin. So we tried to think of a room because women want a room, right? And she did it. Thank you very much. The Lair, the Love and Inspiration Room. So we call it the Ladies' Lair. And when we stage a property, with a room like that. Because guess what? Who's making the decision if they're married? The woman. So let's be clear on that too. Yeah. So, you have to go to your buyer, and you have to really, I think all these people doing white countertops and gray, and it's like, come on, let's mix it up a bit. So
you brought up Snapchat, you brought up, I believe, Amazon. LA has become quite quickly a land that is catering to tech. Everyone here is dealing directly with some tenants. I know Jeff on his end has had some good luck with several sort of big ticket tenants. Do you think there's any sense that LA as a city is now slightly too heavily dependent on tech? And I say that because tech, even though it has incredible valuations, is a big employer, also comes with a degree of volatility that we may not have seen in different other industries, maybe finance during the crisis, but you can have a company that's worth $1 billion, and then the next day they could be worth 50 million, right? So mass wipeout of valuations, layoffs in some cases. You're designing a project at the Sears building that is ideally going to land, I think you called it a techie or a tech-ish tenant, right? Any concern there that we're maybe a little bit too gung-ho on tech at the moment? And anyone else who wants to take that after?
So we're building a project adaptively reusing the Sears building in Santa Monica and doing a project that is going to have an office and kind of retail component to it. And I would say we are not targeting a tech tenant. We are really building a project that will be available to any tenant. But we recognize that that market is kind of a hot market right now. I mean, I think one of the things about Los Angeles that is unique is that we have a number of different industries that are based here. We have entertainment, you have tech, you have finance, you have a lot of different businesses that are here for different reasons, so that helps diversify, your options. And so we're about to pull permits and start construction probably March or April. And we're getting interest from a variety of different types of tenants. I mean, it's a little soon, right? Because tenants want to see that you're actually going and your project is actually real, which it is. So, we'll start once we're under construction to get more viability around things. I mean, I think.
Are you doing residential or commercial in that?
We're doing, right now it's office and retail. We are looking, City of Santa Monica passed its downtown community plan and they carved out 4 sites to what's called a gateway master plan. Ours is one of those 4. So we'll be heavily involved in that process and for a phase 2 component to our project. But I think there is one of the challenges, I was going to say about the tech tenants is credit. Because, whether it's a WeWorks or I'm just going to make up a name because I know this name, I don't know anything about their credit, so full disclosure, a Riot Games or some of these other types of tenants, establishing credit in order to make that lease for 10 years is an important facet of it, right? So,
Jeff, I want to get your take.
My take on this is that, sure, we're attracting the media, the digital, also along Jefferson Boulevard now, the biotechnology. So tech now is integrating into so many different fields. I don't see it fading out. Sure, you're going to see companies, they're going to go up, they're going to go down, but tech itself is here to stay. I don't see any company that can survive without some level of tech involved in it. It's just integrated. It's how, to talk about retail, it's how retail people shop. I mean, it's how they do their habits. I mean, amazing, just on the shopping part, our malls in Culver City are very, very successful, the Westfield Mall, and a lot of that is because the malls now are just sort of evolving along. They recognize that, hey, how are we going to keep this business? So, we've got health clinics in malls now. There's plans now, I know, in the future where they're going to put housing in the malls. So that's coming along too. So it's really, I think, just from my perspective, the city being able to be open to change and understand it and have the foresight. We just laid a brand new fiber network that hopefully within the next several months we'll have hooked up. But it's to allow a lot of the companies that are here in Culver City so they stay, so they have enough fiber bandwidth to broadcast out and to attract a lot of new companies. So it's doing those kind of things. And one last thing, we are just embarking on our general plan update. So know
Great.
that.
How many years will it be until it's done?
I'll probably be, you'll be at my funeral.
I think you deserve a little extra cred because Jeff, as the political on the panel, you knew you were going to take some hits, so I appreciate you being here. Tom, go ahead.
I was just going to add, I agree with what Casey said as it relates to, as you asked, hitting the tech exposure. I think the benefit we have, I guess 2 things I wanted to say, because it relates also to what Tammy said and what we're creating in Culver City, right now we're underway on a 200,000 square foot office building. And it's not so much that we've had the building designed to attract tech tenants per se, as Casey was saying. It's more about what's the product today. And I think the product today is so much about experience, and it goes back to the experience that these users want to have. I mean, it's not unlike what they've done here with Water Garden, right? You've created this environment where people want to be, they can be comfortable, they can be entertained, you can put retail with it, restaurants, cafes. You want to walk on Abbott Kinney and that be kind of your office communal space, but then be able to go upstairs and be in your office. And that's really what we're trying to create in Culver City. But I think it relates back, I want to make a point as you asked about tech. I think the benefit we have in LA, we've had a pretty diverse set of industries, as Casey was saying, over a number of years, right? And we had a lot of aerospace, we've always had entertainment, we've had travel and leisure, we've got the finance. I think even as it gets characterized as tech, it's not just tech. I mean, I think really what we're faced with here in LA is entertainment still, and it's the merging of entertainment and technology that's creating the content. So what we're really seeing in Culver City and here in Santa Monica, and even with the gaming industry, right? You think about Riot Games, or we think about Apple, or we think about Amazon, Netflix, they're all creating their own content. Now it's a fight for content. So LA has the entertainment backing and the knowledge base to then link it with the tech and create the content. So I think what we're seeing now is really more a growth of the content creation, that we'll continue to see a battle in that. And I guess I get a little concerned because maybe that's 10 years from now when all of a sudden we figure out who wins that battle, right? I mean, we've got a little bit of growth time to get there, but at some point there's going to be winners and losers.
Has there been enough incentives on the city or state level? So, we're thinking of Amazon HQ2, Chris Christie in New Jersey. I think he promised about $7 billion in tax breaks. I don't think Amazon was interested in going to New Jersey, but has there been enough done, you think, in terms of a financial incentive for some of these companies to come in?
I mean, I'll be the first one to say I don't think HQ2 is coming to LA. I know it's on the short list, but it's not coming here. So, and I don't have any inside information, but it's unlikely. I mean, but that's really more at a state level. I mean, I think that's really at the state level more so than it is at the local level, in terms of what they're trying to create.
I actually think because these millennials and these people in this tech world are so creative and want the experience, they want to live where it's sunny, period. They want to be by the beach. They want to be walking. They want to be hip. They want all these things. And if you really look at Los Angeles and the west side of Los Angeles, that's what we are. So, they might not need all the tax incentives to get here because it's all about the talent. And if they can't get the talent because they're in New Jersey, nobody, no offense to anyone out there, but nobody wants to go to New Jersey, okay? I mean, at least those guys don't. I'll go there.
Not today, the snowstorm's coming.
Yeah, but so it's really what I find in my groups of, because I work with a lot of the tech companies and the heads of them, and I'm like, you guys, they want to be here, period. So they have to, we're seeing some of the tech companies help with some housing. They definitely want their people buying. I mean, one of the things that I say that the worker that, was making 120, I'm like, buy. I don't care if you're buying a $300,000 condo in West LA, just a little kind of, I'm sorry, but a little dumpy. Get in this market, because if you're not in this market will totally catapult you.
Sort of leave you behind, and then you're
Oh God, it'll leave you behind. So that's like really very important. Even if they're not getting the experience in that crappy little condo, they need to be there for 3 years.
Casey, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so anecdotally, I was just talking with friends of mine that I've been friends with for 25 years. She's an artist, he's a freelance graphic designer, they live in an apartment. They're terrified. They've been in the same apartment all this time, and he's saying, what if we get kicked out? We're going to have to move to Fontana. They're terrified. And so that goes back to this problem of how do you get in and stay in, and so.
I did have a brokerage-specific question for you, just for audience from that world. The landscape's changed quite a bit. There's been a lot of national interest in the LA market. You've had some of the national players like Douglas Elliman and Compass come in. Has that changed the game for you and what you do and the people around you? Just in terms of how you sell a home or how you're marketing things. You've got, when national players come in, there tends to be a little bit of a shakeup, whether it's poaching or, bigger marketing budgets. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's a big discussion because I'm actually an employee-based model. So we have a totally different model than most brokerages do. So, they don't have all the services. Like we have 2 handymen on our staff that are complementary to our clients. We have a cleaning person complementary. So the national brokerages coming in, taking every single broker or agent they can get, they don't care about the quality of the control. They they can't even quality control their own agents because they're all independent contractors. So that's the niche we have. And we have, I think, 25% of the Venice marketplace and 8.8% of the Westside market are, and we're a boutique. So I think we're doing okay.
But in general, are you seeing
I'm not,
some
no,
of the
I mean,
competitors
no.
around changing their game plan? Or?
Not really, because it's all the same agents working for different brokerages. So they're all coming. This is what happens in the residential marketplace. Literally, it's cyclical. So it's funny, like they all come in, and then they all go to boutiques because they all get sick of and then they go back again and back. So it's just cyclical, It's really right now with the market. I think it's being steadfast and strategic, and being full circle with your clients. But I don't think that some of them made the best plan on just kind of stomping in and saying, okay, now we're Pacific Union and we have all these brokerages, and they didn't really, you have to, when you're coming in to implement, you have to implement softly and kindly and in the right way. And from what I've heard, I mean, I'm not obviously there, it hasn't been that smooth on that.
Stephen, I wanted to get your a little bit of a national perspective. You're obviously very active, Chicago, Texas as well. You've just spent some good amount of airtime talking about the barriers to development in LA. And what are the upsides? What are the reasons to be here?
First of all, you should be more nervous about people developing applications for people to serve. I mean, my wife gets on Trulia and some of these other places, and I keep waiting.
Those are who we partner with. Those are our partners.
But I keep waiting for a really robust application to be developed that will put seller to buyer directly together. And I think that is probably, I grew up, my father was a home builder and ran a brokerage firm. And I would be nervous about that more than Douglas Elliman coming in and hiring people and giving them 5% more of the commission or whatever, they do to recruit them away.
What we've always done, like when Zillow came in and everybody was like, oh my God, there's Zillow. We were like, let's partner with Zillow. So, I keep those people very close and actually work with them because that's the way to do it. Yeah. So I'm with you, but we're riding that wave.
I did want to ask, but before that, just a friendly reminder, if you could just silence your cell phones, Tamagotchis, whatever else you have, it'll help with the conversation. Thank you. Go ahead.
So national markets, I mean, somebody just said it. LA's weather, forget about the traffic, although thank you Waze. The Israelis who developed Waze and sold it to Google, I don't know anybody, how many people use Waze on a regular basis? I am shocked I don't see more hands up. Because I actually spend, I'm sorry to say this, a fair amount of time driving through Culver City when I want to go to downtown LA, like to the, a Lakers game or whatever, because I don't get on the 405 or the 10 much anymore.
Waze has actually amplified the number of complaints that we get because it's taken people off of the major thoroughfares and they're all going down the residential streets. So.
Oh yeah, I'm on Venice Boulevard all the time. It's like, what? But I've gotten to learn a lot more about LA since Waze came out. Actually, I think long term, if more people used it, it would even the traffic out everywhere, and I think it would make things better. But for now, you got a lot of people on residential streets that are pissed off because there's just a row of people coming through 2 blocks parallel to Venice Boulevard or Washington
it's really
or whatever.
Because we have a lot of families in our single-family homes in Culver City, so it's definitely an issue that we're kind of grappling with and really working hard, to look at ways besides the Expo line to offer different modalities of transportation. As public transportation in Los Angeles slowly comes along and increases, at least us in Culver City, we're trying to look at ways. We just kind of finished a trans-occupancy district a study of looking at traffic in that area around the Expo line, and we're, as a council, going to be working on that and looking at potentially taking some lanes and making dedicated bus lanes during rush hour or early morning hours and helping that and looking at, autonomous vehicle shuttles to bring employees from the expo stations to their work over at, be it the Hayden track where we have a lot of employees or other couple of other hubs that are not within immediate walking distance.
But this is your final year in office, am I right?
Oh yeah, I'm out to pasture.
So once
April 30th, they're done with me.
So once Stephen's mayor, what sort of advice would you have for him? Because I think he's taking your spot now.
My personal perspective is I look at Culver City, I'm a complete homer, and I've lived there over 30 years, and I've seen the change. And most importantly, I see the change around us, particularly around the corridors, transportation corridors of LA, and as they realistically they're verticalizing, and it is creating more housing slowly, not to the pace. It's still not obviously up to pace, but I look at Culver City as somewhat of a mecca, so I have a lot of mixed reservations when it comes to development and really going straight up in Culver City. And maybe that's sort of a NIMBYistic perspective that I carry, and I'm sure it does to some degree, but I think we're kind of unique that we're surrounded on LA by all four sides, so we feel those implications. So I think what makes Culver City attractive, that it still has kind of certain zoning that, really limits to what you can do.
I'm going to open it up to the audience in a minute. I just wanted to ask Casey about the adaptive reuse project, the advantages of that method, some of the headaches that you need to deal with, and whether you would do it again. And Tom, if you have any thoughts on that, I love that as well.
So, for people who might not know who we are, Seritage was formed about 2.5 years ago, and we own 253 Sears properties around the country, and we're redeveloping and repurposing all that real estate. So we are in a massive, you ask about what's going on around the country, I oversee west of the Rockies. And so we span from, Reno to Carson to Santa Monica to San Diego to Redmond, which is where Microsoft is headquartered, and each one is its own unique puzzle. And a lot of them we're reusing. And so, it becomes a model of, number one, the one in Santa Monica is historic, so there was no choice. And originally, I think that was seen as a negative, because I think that, people wanted to potentially see that. I work for New Yorkers, so I'll leave that comment alone. But, they wanted to see kind of a blank slate, and I said, no, this is an opportunity. And so we're really taking the building, which is on the city's seismic retrofit list, and we're using that as an opportunity to design a project that both retrofits the building and breathes new life into it by creating this dynamic project. And so, I've spent a fair amount of time in my career doing that type of work. And so I think it provides an opportunity. Different challenges from a building perspective, clearly. And sometimes those challenges are more problematic than others. But
Has there been more community buy-in when you take a project and you're not doing a tear down in that sense?
depends on the location. Here in Santa Monica, I'm proud to say we had unanimous approval from the Landmarks Commission, and we were able to get through the city process, which Santa Monica has a reputation for being a particularly difficult city to get entitled, and we were able to do it in a year. So, I go to Coastal Commission tomorrow, so everybody cross your fingers and your toes and say a prayer or whatever. So assuming that we get approved through the Coastal Commission, we'll be able to pull permits March or April.
Best of luck to you.
I was just going to say we're excited about Casey's work with the Sears site. It was actually, I guess, unfortunate for us that Seritage came in and acquired all the Sears sites. This was a site that we actually had pursued with Sears at one point as well. But given how long it's taken, maybe we're pleased that we weren't successful. But I did want to say, so I think as we grew up, so I think I got my tough skins at Sears there too. So we're on the same page.
And popcorn.
The only thing I was going to mention, Hiten, was transit. I know Jeff brought it up a little bit too. I think the Expo line has breathed new life a little bit into the transit options in terms of the Westside and where things stand. And I think the growth in LA County as a whole in terms of transit is monumental. Sometimes it goes unsaid, but you look at what the results of Measure R have been with $40 billion of funding, and now with Measure M that we all approved, a year and a half ago, $120 billion of transportation funding. It's unheard of in terms of the amount of scale and impact that Metro now will have on the LA region. Not only on rail, but on bus, on freeways, everything that they're doing. They're probably at this point, now more than tripling. It used to be more than doubling the number of rail stations. Now we're probably more than tripling them. So there's a whole new transportation network that's come back into play. And although it hasn't yet been fully adopted, I'll say, by many of the tenants we may see in our buildings, I think the expectation is that it will be. And so people are starting to make decisions now based upon the fact that they can be proximate to a transit alternative.
And I'd like to open it up to questions now. If you just raise your hand.
By the way, before the question comes up, my hope is that the LA will get more serious about policing the Expo line because you still have a homeless problem on it. And if you're, you know, a 35-year-old gal and you're working late and you need to take that from Santa Monica to Culver City, you think twice about getting on. And I think, you know, I'm from Chicago. I commuted on a rail line for over 20 years of my career. And the stuff that I see or I hear about on Expo Line, you'd never see in New York or Chicago or DC in their lines. And I don't know, anybody who's got access to people in LA, transportations, they ought to invest some money into putting more security and frankly rousing the homeless who will get on those trains and hang out, make a nuisance of themselves and scare everybody else away.
What do you think about water? We're not utilizing any sort of transportation, a ferry system that you'd find in New York or Italy to connect. Now that we've got the metro into downtown Santa Monica, there's a connection you can make in Redondo, et cetera, bringing people up the coast via water.
I'll take it. I'll give it a try. That's an interesting question, interesting thought. I think it's certainly a possibility. I think there's still some practical challenges probably to the duration and the time. I just don't know enough about how quickly they can get, you know, say if someone wanted to get from Redondo to Santa Monica, you know, we'd need to create, you know, docks and ports and all the rest, and then you'd have to have a hydrofoil system that would make it reasonable from a time perspective as opposed to trying to ride the new Crenshaw line, which will open in 2 years from the airport up. Or potentially being on the highways. I don't know, it's an interesting question, I hadn't thought much of it.
So you get to Catalina, right? So it exists. So.
It does, it definitely exists. It's, I think for LA, I mean my sense, and I'm not a transportation planner, I think it certainly works very well when you think about the East Coast and New York and New Jersey and the Bay Area and all the rest, where there's some shorter hops to and from large population centers. I think here it's linear right along the coast. You're gonna have to go from one distance, in most cases probably further away than you might for a shorter hop. That's my expectation.
A lot of cities in general have neglected the waterfront to their peril, right? I mean, New York has just started to be smart about it, but if you look at where Vancouver is, for example, they're way ahead of any of the cities in the US. Gentleman there with the yellow notepad.
Hi, my name is Andre Bueno. I'm an affordable housing developer. With all the new regulations that are coming into place, JJJ, we're just now going to start seeing the effects. I know a lot of big developers aren't putting a lot of cranes in the sky. What do you think the outlook looks like, and how possible do you think it'll be for SB 827 to actually pass?
But it's the bill in the state legislature or Senate that would permit additional density and height along transit nodes where there's transportation corridors, right? Let's see, so let's start with the first one. So I think in terms of Measure JJJ and the prospect for larger scale residential development, I think there's a challenge there inherent with the zoning. If I think about LA as a whole, many of the larger properties in LA are typically zoned manufacturing. Most of them are M2. So in most cases, if it's a developer, maybe such as ourselves or Steve, we'd like to do things that are 200, 300 units at a minimum. And in order to do that, you need land area. And in most of those land area cases, they're manufacturing zones. So they're going to be required to do a zone change, general plan amendment. It's a lengthy process. The outcome's uncertain. And you have Measure JJJ to contend with, so now you have higher costs in terms of both affordability requirements as well as labor union requirements. So that makes it all the more challenging. So I think, as Steve pointed out, those are typically sites that we would look at and say, you know, probably not worth the effort given today. There's way too much uncertainty and too difficult and too lengthy of a process. So I think that's going to be a challenge. As it relates to the Senate bill measure that's circulating now, I know it's in circulation and it's probably still in committee. There's obviously an awful lot of opposition that's already ramped itself up, particularly here in LA. I think there'll continue to be opposition throughout in LA because the measure, the way it's, or the legislation, the way it's written now, I think is just so overly broad that it covers way too much area. I think if that were narrowed down its focus to specific distances, locations, types of properties, and then it gets all kinds of complications, that would have a greater chance of success. Right now, I think there's too many homeowners and residents that are scared to death because the density could increase right next door to them that they would never anticipated. So I think it's got some work to be done.
We read an article yesterday, it was an opinion piece in the in Bloomberg about possibly getting rid of, and Tammy, you kind of touched on it, just like quite, like with the zoning, there's this need for all this parking, per unit. I mean, is there any sort of end in sight to how much parking is going to be required, and what does that kind of look like?
Oh, the city has actually addressed that. Santa Monica, for example, 5 years ago, reduced the parking requirements from 1 car per to less. San Francisco now discourages parking completely, and you actually have to pay fees to put some parking in your building. LA, we've gone from 2 car, 2.5 car parking per unit down to 1. Although we're finding, because LA is still largely car-driven, that when we do a project because most apartment projects have a lot of 1 bedrooms and a lot of studios, because most of our renters are single. And then the couples will take the 2 bedrooms or the larger 1 bedrooms. But the 1 bedrooms, we're finding the demand is running a little higher than 1-to-1, because even in an area like Koreatown that has great public transportation, still a lot of people driving. So it's kind of give and take. You can't just cut the parking back, assuming people use public transportation when they're not using it yet, or enough of them aren't using it yet. But it is coming down. Now, there's a guy in LA by the name of Don Shoup, who is a brilliant guy. He's a professor at UCLA. They call him the Michael Jordan of traffic. Okay? Now, this is a guy who came in, for example, to Santa Monica and said, you get a lot of complaints about people shopping on Montana Avenue. They can never get a parking spot. He said, why don't you price meters higher near Montana and cheaper several blocks away? He said, here's what's going to happen. All your workers and the guys working in the kitchen, cooking and stuff like that, who come in early, who steal all the good spots, and then they may take a break and move their car if it's a 2-hour, 3-hour limit, but they might move it down a spot or something. Those people will park further away. And the person who is coming in to get their haircut, meet a girlfriend for lunch, they'll pay the premium. They'll pay $1.50, $2 an hour. Even Santa Monica, I've noticed, and I don't know if anybody can confirm for me, it appears that they have finally started pricing their garages so that you don't get it free for an indefinite period of time. I mean, I was in Santa Monica last night. I paid $6 when I took my car out. I was downtown for several hours. His theory is that if you start pricing parking based on demand, you will then even things out so everybody finds a place to park. And we need more of that in LA.
It's jurisdiction by jurisdiction, right? So we're pushing in our projects for lower parking ratios, and then you have market realities and financing realities too. So you've got to convince your capital investors and your lenders that your parking ratios are correct given the market. So even when the parking requirements may go down, you still may have an issue in terms of being able to get your project. But we are seeing a lot of cities, so we're doing a multifamily project in Westminster and one up in Newark, which is outside of, in the East Bay, and then one up outside of Seattle, and each one has its own unique approach to how they're looking at parking.
We'll take one final question, yes.
What are your thoughts of the road diets, which is the design for all of Los Angeles?
My thoughts right now are to maintain, depending on the road it's through, if there's enough room in the road to accommodate a dedicated bike lane and not take away an auto travel lane, I'm in favor of that, if that answers your question.
There's one more gentleman who's been waiting. Go ahead.
I think I got a good question for you guys to finish on. It's about real estate cycles and where we're at. Obviously, the market's hot. Cap rates are super low. It's hard to find good deals for development. It's hard to find good deals for home builders. And if you look at the cycles over the last 100 years, the average cycle is 8 to 10 years. We're coming up on the top of this cycle. Where do you think we are? What are you guys planning on for your pipelines, and what asset class do you think is going to get hit first?
Let me throw it back at the audience. Of you who invest or develop in real estate, how many of you are going to build more projects in the next 3 years than you built in the last 3 years? None.
We got one.
One brave soul.
One.
What do you
He must be new in the business. I asked this question last week at a roundtable in Chicago, got the same response. One person raised their hand. I think everybody sees that the obstacles that have developed, like the city councils trying to throw the affordable housing thing on developers who just say, we can't make it work, so we're just not going to build. I think, I think the economy is such, this cycle could be in the fourth inning of a doubleheader. But I think for real estate development, other than areas that get some insight, like let's say El Segundo decides they want to invite more housing in to support all those tech guys taking over warehouses and bringing more jobs there. Or Culver City, which has an opportunity because there's more demand on the west side. As those things change, I think we'll see more growth. But I think it's going to be a tight market, and we're not going to see as much new construction in the next 3 years as we saw in the last 3.
I would just agree with Steve. I mean, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of new starts that are coming. I think there's still an awful lot of development that's been in the pipeline here, like a lot of ours, for 5 and 6 years, and they're now coming to fruition. That's going to take 2 or 3 years to build them. But I can tell you, I mean, it's tough for us to get one of these things done, and starting another one now that would complete 6, 8, 9 years from now is probably not in the cards. I mean, it's just tough to do. But I would also say, and again, not being the economist, you can't time it all just based upon the typical cyclical cycles of 8 to 10 years or 7 to 9 years or the rest. I mean, I think we are in a little bit different situation where we are seeing a good measured pace of growth. We're not in a real estate cycle where we've significantly overbuilt. We don't have dramatic vacancy. We still have relatively low interest rates. I mean, I think there's still an opportunity for things to continue to proceed as they move forward, but on a measured pace. I mean, I think I just have to lay that part of caution with it, and I think that the market's going to dictate that anyway because it's so hard to get things done. So I think it'll continue a bit.
And I just think I would say it feels a little 2006-ish right now. There's such a frenetic pace of so much going on right now. I don't know, everybody that I know is just extremely busy. But at the same time, you have all of these other market factors. You have new tariffs that we're now hearing from the construction side. They're having a harder time getting supplies. The tariffs and the impact are real. Construction costs are going up, every year in double digits. And it's just, LA is always going to be a great market, right? So and I think there will be some sort of adjustment, but right now it's very difficult to find.
I'd be careful to use the 2006 as a metaphor.
Because
Because I completely disagree with you. In 2006, we had so much money being thrown at
I agree.
unqualified borrowers, 100% mortgage financing for
I
condos.
just meant, I agree with you
houses.
on
No,
that.
but I mean,
It's
that's
this
where things
feeling
got overheated.
of franticness, I think, is
Because
the,
our capital markets are very stable now.
yes.
We, as Tom pointed out, we don't have enough supply
Right.
for apartments, for condos,
Right.
smaller condos, whatever. We don't have enough of anything.
Right.
We don't have enough office space on the west side for all the companies that want to grow here.
It's just harder to get done right now.
What I think on it is, I think that in the last couple of years, and actually in 2006 and 2007, there was almost a frantic, like, I have to buy. All right, and I think that what we're missing and we really need to pay attention to is the 17%, the 23% upswing that most developers were banking on is not there. And I think that there is, yes, are we always going to rise on the west side of Los Angeles? Yes, because there's not enough supply, there never will be. But I think we're going to look at a more, if you could call it normalized, but, from, let's say, 9 to 13%. So I do see that over the next couple of years. I do see with all the new tax laws, it is affecting people. People are not just like, oh my God, unless it's a deal or if it's under 2 million. But anything over, they want to know what they're buying in, and they want to know all the numbers, and they do the research.
So I grew up watching cricket, so the only way I've learned about baseball is by moderating these panels, because we always get the, which innings are we in. So thank you for that question, and thanks so much to our panelists. Please give them a round.